Okay, hello. I don't want to talk like that all day. So. Hello and welcome to the session on volunteerism. It's a very important topic. It's something that we all consider as a very positive thing, so we can all, just say that it's great and then we can all go to lunch, but we won't do that. We will try to address even the challenging sides of volunteerism. We will try to engage into a lively discussion among my fellow panelists and experts here. Based on their thoughts and experiences, and hopefully the questions and thoughts by you, by the audience in the end. So I want to start by introducing my fantastic panel here. Ladies first, Myrto, the lady with a nice name. She's an economist and founder of Volunteer for Greece. She has 11 years of work experience in the fields of finance and entrepreneurship. She's worked on several projects, including microfinance, and I've had the chance to work with her on that. Dr. José Antonio Bastos is a member of the International Board of the MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. He's the president of MSF Spain, experience in the field throughout a series of countries, including Bolivia, Angola, Congo, Kenya, many, many others. Okay, then I'll go further to Takis. Dr. Panagiotis Koulouvaris, an orthopedic surgeon with experience from Memorial Sloan Kettering, the Hospital of Special Surgery in New York, a member of the Focus team for missions in Ghana, and leading the mobile medical units in Greece currently, which is a program running through a grant from our foundation. And Mr. Stavros Benos, president of the board of Diazoma. He has served as mayor of Kalamata, as culture minister, minister of the Aegean, deputy minister of public order. Now, we will do this as follows. Each of the four panelists will address one of the issues related to volunteerism, following questions from me for about 5 to 7 minutes. Then we will open up the specific issue to the rest of the three panelists. And hopefully, get the issue challenged and engage into an interesting and challenging discussion among the panelists. And at the end, we'll try to cut this perhaps a bit shorter so that you can all go to lunch and be happy. We will allow time for questions and insights from you guys. So I'll start with Takis to begin with, and I want to address the nature of the volunteerism phenomenon itself, because it appears that it's not so straightforward as it could seem from a surface point of view. I want to ask you, what is the nature of volunteerism? Is it a civic duty? Is it an obligation of individuals within society? And what are the personal benefits of volunteerism? And then I'll come back to a few questions later on.
Thank you very much, Myrto, for the kind invitation. I would like to share with you and with the audience my personal experience. I believe volunteerism is a real teamwork, and it paves for a spiritual and personal growth. So here we are in Ghana. Dr. Boachi is the head of spine in Cornell University in New York, and he is my mentor. Actually, when I finished my fellowship, I was asked by him to join him in a volunteer team to give surgeries in Ghana, West Africa. And after that, we are in Greece with Stavros Niarchos Foundation. I am happy to be a member of the medical team of mobile medical units for the 35 remote islands. I believe here we are in Astypalia, in Amorgos, and in Kassos, our team. I believe in your question, I will answer that I believe it's civic responsibility, it's not an obligation, and it dates to ancient Rome. And actually in 519 BC, Celsius Cincinnati was the first one who was voyaged to ancient Rome. And then in 1787, it was a blueprint for democracy in the US Constitution. So to my point of view, it's a civic responsibility. There is, in US, there is 1 out of 3 persons that is currently volunteer in a team. There are multiple effects. There are many personal benefits. The person who denotes time at work, he has an enjoyable experience actually, and he has a path to personal development. And the person can ensure and uphold the democratic values, and it's of paramount success for democracy. I strongly believe volunteerism is a paramount success of democracy and philanthropy. Also, as I can see here, for Greece, before crisis, I believe the supreme value was to be rich and successful with less effort possible. Now things have changed, and everyone has realized that we need to cooperate together, and we need to help each other, and we need to have government and individual responsibility for certain problems for the society. On the other hand, the state should realize that they have to support the volunteers and not to inhibit new actions from them.
I want to draw from one of your points, if I may. And it's interesting because it relates a lot to exactly what we consider volunteerism, the very nature and definition of it. For example, in Greece, even in official rankings, we're ranked one of the last countries from a total of something like 135 countries in the World Giving Index because of our low rates of volunteerism, giving, charitable giving, etc. But on the other hand, we do see that there's been a real surge, and we experience this a lot in the foundation, and we do say that this is very much the case. A surge in social solidarity, the willingness of people to help each other, even at times of distress for their own families and themselves. So can this be considered officially as volunteerism? Does it have to be as straightforward as it is in the US that you mentioned, where people just go and are parts of charitable organizations and help in a very specific manner? Where does it start? Where does it end?
Yes, I believe both ways are more effective. If I take, for instance, our actions for the islands, what we did, the state actually did not have any specific plan for the people in the islands. So we discussed with the Minister of Health, and we didn't see any specific plan. Then we took actions, and I have my colleagues, they're here, two health visitors, that they called all the islands. They talk with the citizens, they talk with the doctors, they talk with the local authorities, and they realize the real problems and the real needs. So we ask the permission from the state to be with us, to be beside us, and we ask the help from the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Then we built a team, both state at the NPO, at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, and now we see the results after the 5 islands that we have a tremendous, we made a tremendous effort, and we have very good results from the citizens. Actually, I believe both state and NPO can build new actions for the citizens.
Perhaps we can open this to the rest of the panel. I want to hear what Myrto has to say about this. Is expressions of social solidarity in a grassroots and organized manner an expression of a form of volunteerism?
Of course it is, and I think you mentioned the states as an example, and we have to agree that Greece is a different society than the US. Is that better? Probably. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. So I'll try and speak. Hopefully you can hear me. So I think what you meant is a great point. Greece is a different society. The structure is a lot looser than the US or other examples, even in mainland Europe. So there's a lot of initiatives that have come out as grassroots effort or as unorganized ways of expressing active citizenship, and I will call it that. We can call it volunteering, which I think it's what it essentially is. But at the end of the day, it's being involved in your society. We touched a bit upon, you mentioned family, and the state was also mentioned before. I think what's happened in Greece with the crisis is that there's been a gap that has been developed. Traditionally, the state in Greece was taking care of a lot of the social needs People expected it to provide for them. People expected it to support the NGOs. It expected a lot of things. With limited finance and, of course, an increase in the needs of organizations, the state had been unable to provide it. So on a macro level, you had a problem. And the family, at the same time, which was traditionally in Greece also providing at a micro level, so taking care of its people, making sure everyone is doing well and is receiving the help they need, was also having problems exactly because of that, limited finance and unemployment, everything like that. So what has emerged, and I think that's why it's actually an opportunity, is that you had the middle part, which was never structured in Greece and was never so let's say, prominent in the society, that has risen up. It's risen up in the form of volunteerism. It's risen up in NGOs, official NGOs. It's risen up in the form of grassroots initiatives that either grow up to be NGOs or not, but they make a difference. And I think that all of this constitute as part of being involved in society. Actually. Okay, so now you can definitely hear me. So yeah, I think this all mounts up to people being involved at the society level, and I do see it very positively.
So is it, I mean, drawing from that, is it then a challenge and a duty for foundations like us, for example, or the state, as you mentioned, to try to organize these efforts better? Will they be more impactful, perhaps, if we organize them and turn them into something more similar to what's happening in the US, let's say? What do you think, or any of the rest of the panelists?
I may disagree with trying to organize it too much. I think that the volunteer activity is by its nature a spontaneous expression of the civil society, and the moment it will be far too ruled and organized, it may just become an extension of the official initiatives, and hence losing its the reflection it has of individuals committed to something. And then one added value that in MSF, Medecins and Volunteers, we value enormously, is that by acting guided by the impulse of individuals that get together to be volunteers, it reaches out populations that may not fit in the interest of states or official institutions. Mm-hmm. It covers other gaps, and I think that's extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with this experience?
Yes. Yes, I do agree, but keep in mind that we should keep high professionalism during this activity. This is a difficult step that we should keep, spontaneously, but at the same time, high professionalism. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, I think both of your organizations agree for that. Please, Parakalo.
I just want to make a couple of comments on what has been said so far. For Greece, vis-à-vis other countries, and as concerns volunteerism and philanthropy, in this country, there is a trend towards volunteerism that is not measurable, and it's always been there. Basically, there are three reasons. We do have a very strong family institution, and you can't actually calibrate that. But the crisis, which has in fact exploded in Greece with such violence, perhaps has not been so dire because the family have stepped in and maintained social cohesion. Second thing is the church. The church is playing a very silent, invisible but important role. And of course, this is something which has to be looked at. Also, don't forget the sort of friendship, the ties of friendship. People. Well, we have seen lots of cases in the crisis where you've had people collecting for a purpose. A friend of mine whose daughter wanted to go abroad, and the friends collected money so that she could, in fact, put on a performance in Sweden for which she didn't have the money. And I agree with you here, my friend, that volunteerism is something which is spontaneous. It's a spontaneous act, and philanthropy as well. So I don't think that I don't think that volunteerism, or rather, I believe volunteerism is a spontaneous human act. If you start thinking of offering your services in order to have some sort of benefit, and if it loses its sort of innocent character, I mean, we have representatives of the church here with us. I remember the letter of Apostle Paul, and I think that therein one has talked about this type of action. But don't confuse it with professionalism. You see, the value of state structures, organizations, and NGOs is for them to also come in with a professionalism to spur on that spontaneity. I've seen two cycles in my life. For example, I lived through the earthquakes in my hometown, Kalamata, where volunteers came in and offered their services, giving a very high quality to the help. In the first few days of the earthquake, the state would give dry food in tin cans to the people affected by the earthquakes. And in fact, we had volunteers come in from Switzerland and other countries to actually cook food in cauldrons. And that was, of course, the one cycle. But I'll talk later on about the other cycle in my life. A question to you. Of course, we're talking about different types of volunteerism and contributions. But, Mr. Benos, do you believe, having looked at a less organized form of volunteerism in Greece and perhaps in Spain, do you think that it also contributes in a more direct manner to increasing volunteerism overall? I mean, that the crisis has fed into that and has led to greater volunteerism. And there are organizations which need more volunteers because of cut budgets. So in the more organized form, has the crisis fed into increased volunteerism? And is this something that after the crisis might lead to a greater increase in volunteerism in Greece and sort of continue? Or do you think it will finish with once the crisis is over? Well, I'll give you, I think, an answer which comes out of empirical knowledge. 2008, just before the crisis exploded, Diazoma was established, which is, in fact, a set of volunteers. And there are only 5 professionals. We have 1,000 volunteer members, and we have thousands of people also working along with us to maintain a part of our cultural heritage, old, ancient sites of performances of all sorts. And people say, well, shouldn't you wait for the crisis to, in fact, be over before you do that? We wanted to collect money to, in fact, help renovate all of these old sites. We have no state funding at all. Well, it must be said that the volunteers we have, along with financial help, it's sort of crowdfunding, as it's called. Each site, for example, has its own little piggy bank where the money goes in to help restore the monuments. And in fact, volunteerism, but also economic help is also on the increase every year. And I can explain that by the following, that in the crisis, people really want to show that this is something that they don't think they deserve. They want to have the true picture of themselves and the country shine through. It's not a matter of whether you are without any work and no paid employment and just sort of killing off time. Volunteerism is 100% a matter of one's heart and what you can offer. So I think that this is the explanation. I'll give you 3 examples for you to understand. Myrto, what's happening on Diazoma. I mean, I'm a very happy man on this. For example, volunteers from Eritrea Myrto, collected some money into the piggy bank, and they undertook the cleaning of the theatre and have been able to motivate the local authorities so that we complete the study which we presented last Saturday of a monument and gave it to the state. It's a ready-made study to the Ministry of Culture to use European funds to complete the monument. The second example, a professor at Barbacchio, Mary Beloiani, organized last year the secondary school children. You can see it on the internet on the Diazoma. We had PowerPoint presentations, and you see that these young children have been able to use technology for this purpose. And then, of course, the same class this year will, in fact, actually put on Wikipedia information of all the theatres, the ancient theatres in Greece. And the third example, a volunteer, Mrs. Betty Hatzinokolaou, who is an expert on tourist economy. She made a proposal for cultural tourism to go through cities with a specific program looking at these ancient theatres. And we have 3 ministries, the EU, and 5 regional organizations in Epirus also working in. It's now become under the NRDP. So you've got now funding for this, and this is something which have impressed Commissioner Hahn, for example, because it is a definition of synergy and how that can dovetail with government and EU structures.
I ask you if you agree with this, or do you see a more direct sense in the increase of volunteerism? You're leading the effort with Volunteer for Greece, a platform for connecting volunteers with NGOs. What have you seen as an experience before we move to the next topic?
The first thing that we've seen, not me yet. I want to say that the first thing that we saw when we built Volunteer for Greece, for those of you who don't know, is a platform that's connecting NGOs to volunteers. So what we're saying is that we believe that exactly because the crisis is here, there are a lot of NGOs that are looking for people, and there are a lot of people that want to volunteer and don't know where to look. They don't know all the NGOs. What we discovered is that there were more people wanting to volunteer than the number of people that the NGOs were ready to get. So it was in fact unbalanced. So we're trying to build a bridge, but it wasn't the right bridge. Exactly because there were a lot of people, and I will mainly refer to 3 groups of people: the unemployed, the students, and people who are in retirement that had an amount of time that they wanted to give. They had the skills that they wanted to give back. And also they had, if you wish, the vision or the heart to actually try and do something. So we've definitely seen a lot of people that want to give something back to the society, that they want to go back to the NGOs and try to offer their skills and their time to do either specific tasks that are skilled, so doctors trying to help out, or even things that are very unskilled, so helping out in a bazaar or something that the NGO is organizing. And I would also like to take this opportunity, Myrto, to draw on what you said last in your question. How do we make sure that this is sustainable? So let's say that things go as we hope, and in a few years things are more on track. We see unemployment levels lowering. We see people going out of this crisis, let's say. How do we make sure that the amount of involvement in the society stays the same? And I think the only solution there is through education from the young age. And I will refer to an actual example that is going to start next year from NGO Desmos, which is introducing a pilot in schools, of introducing volunteering in schools. It's going to start out with 10 schools in Attica, and hopefully it will go on a national level. This is a program to start teaching kids from a very young age, both in the classroom, so discuss principles of volunteerism, exactly what it means and what's the idea of a volunteer, and also have some biomatic experiences, so some interactive workshops with the involvement of NGOs, etc., that will show kids from a very young age how to be involved. And I think that is our duty today, to make sure that the next generation is trained, something which we didn't have, at least I didn't have it when I was growing up here in Greece, to make this part of their life and understand that it is part of what they do.
So is it that we all agree that we need the extra step in order to ensure that the crisis itself is not enough, that we need to sustain this increase in volunteerism through more formal means? Is there anybody that wants to add something to that, or we can move to the next?
I'd like to add it's how we could recruit high-skilled people for Voyager and how we could keep them with us, to last. This is a tricky because I've had a difficulty, This is the most important step from my point of view, from my personal experience, because I need high-skilled people with me for the medical units. It's a little difficult because high-skilled people are always busy. They always try to find time. I don't know, Mr. Bastos.
This is a perfect turn to what I want to address to Jose here, about what you said. So I want to switch this around and turn this on to the employer side, the organization side. The importance of volunteers in an organization, right? The limits to the reliability that an organization can place on volunteers, and the MSF is a very interesting example in that, in how it uses volunteers and where it stops using volunteers. It needs remuneration and in positions of responsibility, as you said. So are there limits to the reliability an organization can place on volunteers and the accountability that they can undertake?
The short answer is yes. There are very, very, very important limits. I want to start using a little bit of the time to thank the Niarchos Foundation for inviting us today here, to invite Medecins Sans Frontieres, to invite me. I want to thank particularly my colleagues from MSF Greece who could be sitting here and instead they have invited me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity because I think this is an issue that we have not discussed enough, and for us it's an interesting discussion we are going to take lessons from. I think it's enriching ourselves in Medecins Sans Frontieres. Briefly, I'm sorry for those of you who may know the organization, Medecins Sans Frontieres, MSF, we define ourselves as a medical humanitarian organization that it's nurtured and rooted on the impulse that any human being around the world has when he witnesses the suffering of other human beings to do something, be compelled by compassion and a bit of outrage on the suffering of others. We were, from the very beginning, a group of doctors who decided to release that impulse through our medical skills. It's an extremely professional organization. It's based on doctors. We provide medical care not to all the population of the world, but very selectively to those who are in a worst situation. We do a complete reverse selection. We try to reach mostly victims of crisis, of wars in particular, but also of natural disasters, of epidemics, of famine, of social exclusion, and provide them, support them with our medical skills, trying to help them to survive in the crisis where the individual and collective survival is at risk. We aim at making as many people and individuals to get out of the crisis alive, healthy, with the less physical and emotional suffering possible, and with their dignity restored, so then they can decide as a collectivity about their own destination in the future. In that sense, humanitarian action is very short-sighted. This is widely criticized, but it's a choice we have. We do not know what's the model of an ideal society. We do not build a better world. We assist people and individuals and collectivities to survive the difficult moments, so then they can decide by themselves. We do a dual action. We think that our medical action is vital, is extremely short-sighted, and it ends in each individual, which is in itself an enormous achievement. I think we have to be able to witness and touch persons in famine situations, epidemics, fleeing the war in Syria, to be able to realize how much each individual is extremely valuable. But we think that this is not enough. We take upon ourselves the responsibility to tell the world what we see. We have a dual mandate of assistance and what we call témoignage, from our French origin. Witnessing, we think we have the responsibility to tell the world what we see, to provoke the political reactions that will end up dealing with the causes of the crisis. Is our way to reach a bit farther and to make the world know. Medecins Sans Frontieres, today, it's a group of 35,000 people working all around the world in around 70 countries. Of these 35,000, 3,000 of them are the most known group, which are what we call the expatriates, the people who go to work to a country different than his or her own country. We call them volunteers, probably wrongly, and I will come into detail now, but we call them volunteers. We provide a wide range of medical care, from basic medical care to people fleeing wars, to hospital cares in areas in the periphery of wars, to immediate response to epidemics, to vaccination, nutritional care, all within the field of the healthcare and the medical care, and all highly specialized. I wouldn't say that even basic healthcare for refugees today is not something that you can improvise. It needs serious skills. Right now, today, as we speak, there is teams of Medecins Sans Frontières responding to the Ebola epidemic in West Africa that, as you know, is beginning to be uncontrolled. I have to say with very little modesty that the only organization besides the Ministries of Health internationally assisting patients on the ground is Medecins Sans Frontières today. We are assisting the population in Congo, a civil war of 2-3 decades that we tend to forget constantly, the victims of famine and malaria, the children in the area of Niger and Mali, both the refugees outside Syria, in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and inside Syria, with big efforts and big risks, etc., etc. I think it's enough here. The important thing, we call ourselves a voluntary organization. We insist that we are a group of volunteers because what inspires us and what we search when we join MSF is to release that, as I said, mix of compassion and anger in many cases for the plight of other human beings, and that's done with a big dose in MSF of passion and individual commitment. We do this, and this is the part we call a volunteer spirit. We do this with the aim, at the same time, for the respect, for the enormous difficulty of the challenges we meet in the field, assisting both victims of war in Syria and the victims of the epidemic of Ebola in West Africa. It's extremely difficult from the technical point of view, but mostly out of sheer respect to the human beings we assist, which are probably the unluckiest human beings on earth, and they don't deserve anyone to do a poor quality job for them. They deserve to make the best quality possible effort. Then we are exquisite with the professionalism. We think that in terms of the quality of the output of our work, we have to be very conscious and thorough. I think if we have been now for 40 years in the world, and we keep growing a bit more than what this group of idealistic doctors from France and other countries wanted 20, 40 years ago, I think it's this strange balance of keeping the passion and the volunteer spirit with a professional, strict. We are very organized for many things. We are very much in favor of standardization of logistics, defined packages, protocols, guidelines. In that sense, it's a bit of a German spirit in the organization. But we have the passion of the Mediterraneans also and that is what is making the things work. I would agree that etymologically we are using wrongly the word volunteer because we pay the people who work with MSF all around the world. They are professionals that are selected, first of all, according to normal professional selection procedures. We want the best of the people that we can recruit to go there. And then, in order to ensure enough stability in time of the support and to allow some people to come and support us without having to sacrifice completely everything, we do a remuneration. Purposefully, MSF salary scales are a little bit below what any professional of the same level of responsibility would get in the private sector or the civil service sectors. And when we are out in the field, today in South Sudan or Central African Republic, our colleagues from other international NGOs or United Nations or even the Red Cross system, they have salaries of a scale that is 2 to 10 times what MSF volunteers get on the field, and we feel very volunteers by their side. And we feel very volunteers because we are normally the crazy, passionate people that put so much energy in what we do that we get enormous results. So the volunteer spirit is not only a self-satisfaction or adolescent political flag, it has a clear impact in the efficiency of what we do. High motivation, anyone who's a manager knows, it's an extremely important ingredient. We use it thoroughly, and we get to do much more for the people who need most in the world, thanks to this strange and difficult balance between voluntarism and professionalism. We think that we are very jealous and very careful in watching our professionalism. There is serious limit to the responsibility of what we do. We think ethical and legal, and being a medical organization, we know very well about medical error, medical ethics, etc. So we don't compromise there. We are extremely, unfortunately, the amount of people that work for MSF that do not get any type of salary from MSF are an absolute minority. There are groups of people that assist us in the offices, in the headquarters. Forgot to mention to you, we're an international movement that is right now rooted in some 23 countries, I think, more or less, with offices of different sizes and degrees of responsibility, in which there is normally a network of people who come and assist. They do basic support. We try to, Apostolos was explaining before very clearly, we try to do it in the most professional way. They have job descriptions, they have training for the work they're doing. It's not only making photocopies, but they're a minority. I have to admit that we are, in sensu stricto, we are not a volunteer organization. We're a professional volunteer.
Okay. Ναι, όχι, θα ερχόμουν σε εσάς ούτως ή άλλως για να σας ρωτήσω.
I will come to you, Stavros, to listen to your comment as well. Can I just put the question to you first, which links into what probably you wanted to say anyway, to ask you basically the following. There is this debate going on between professionalism, and Takis also raised this. There are specific sectors in which they're working and professionalism is perhaps more important. But in other areas where you have volunteers, where you, for example, in Diazoma, you have a lot of volunteers. Is there such a debate going on between professionalism and volunteerism without expertise? Well, that was the question I wanted you to ask me, Myrto. Three basic concepts have to be distinguished here. Volunteerism is, in fact, spontaneity. But it doesn't mean that it's somebody who's unemployed or homeless or wants to pass the time. Excellent results are achieved if you have that spontaneity from people who have a high degree of professionalism and a vision. I'll take an example from Diazoma. We have studies being drawn up, and we deliver them to the state, say, of ancient theatres. And all of these studies are done free of charge, but done by Manolis Kores, who is, in fact, an international personality in the field. So he would supervise all of those undertaking the studies. And that, therefore, is a very high level of professionalism, but with a lot of love and spontaneity and a full-blown volunteer. Something else which I've seen, for example, the earthquakes in Kalamata, and now in Diazoma, we have 5 professionals. But for a program to be drawn up, we have a program, for example, of 50 ancient theatres being renovated. The state has only covered 10 of the theatres. In order to be able to really do this, you have to be very disciplined. You have to be very disciplined. You may be a volunteer, but you must be very disciplined in what you do. We have an e-program, which is called The Next Step, Logistics. And this, of course, shows you where each issue is at stake and where you should intervene. We have a sort of, if you like, an alternative form of Medecins Sans Frontières, but without the Medecins. Thank you very much. Perhaps I can move on to Myrto. Myrto.
Theoretical to the much more practical. Lessons to be learned. I hope we have members of NGOs in the audience, and I want them to hear this, and for all of us to hear this. What are considered effective volunteer methods? What are lessons to be learned? What are common mistakes, perhaps in Greece, perhaps abroad, to be avoided? Can you share a bit about
Sure, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Can I ask as well, who here runs an NGO or is very involved in an NGO? Raise your hand.
Lots of
Great.
people.
So a lot of people here. So hopefully you can also comment and ask questions and participate at the end. I think it would be really great. And I guess all of you are using volunteers in your organizations? Yeah, show of hands. Most of you. Okay, great. And you are volunteers. Me too, actually. I'm a volunteer for Greece and the other two. So I'm not from a professional perspective. I wanted to briefly comment on what Mr. Benos said, and he used the word discipline. it's usually used with a bad connotation in Greece, because discipline is something we don't do. But I think it's very, very important to make sure that volunteers have a very clear understanding between the NGO and the volunteer, that the relationship is not loose. So it's not a relationship that you can come in whenever you want, pick up whatever you're told or you see fit, and just try to add value as you think. From the NGO's perspective, I think it's very important to make sure that they have a structure for the volunteer and they have very specific tasks and deliverables that they expect from him. To achieve that, and that leads me to the question, you asked Myrto, which has to do with best practices. You need to first, as an NGO, know what you're looking for in a volunteer. So have defined the needs of your organization in order to grow. Have short-term and medium-term perspectives and exactly how you intend to use the volunteer to fill those. And make that very clear in your communication. So when NGOs are looking for volunteers, they look for them in a number of ways. They can look for them online, through friends, through more organized ways. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that it's very clearly communicated to the people who will be coming in as volunteers, what is expected for them, what's the time commitment that's expected, what are the tasks that you will need their support for, what training you will be providing, who else they will be working with, and of course also how they will grow personally, and I will close with that. I will come back to that issue at the end. So the first thing in terms of good practices is to know what you want and communicate it very clearly. So express it very clearly so there are no misunderstandings. The second thing is the discipline. So once the volunteer is within the organization, they need to have very clear tasks and deliverables and things that they are expected. The third thing I would say is always the feeling of belonging in a team. So whatever you can do to make them understand that they are, even though they're a volunteer, they're part of your entire team. They're involved with other volunteers, they're involved with professionals, they're involved with the beneficiaries many times, so the people that you're helping in whichever principle you're helping. So they need to be very professional in what they do. They need to follow the training that you've provided, and they need to make sure they stick to your guidelines. You also can do nice things to make them feel like a team. So have games, go out for drinks, make T-shirts, whatever it is that will make them feel happy about it. And the last thing that I think is a very good practice and it helps NGOs retain volunteers is how they help them grow. So just because someone is very good at doing something, so you get a volunteer who's amazing at calling people up and asking them to show up at your event, or asking them for a donation, or asking them to help specifically, doesn't mean that they have to do it forever, all the time that they come in your organization. That's the only thing they could do. Maybe that's the highest value for the NGO because they're really good at it, they're really good with people, but maybe they personally want to evolve into something else, or they want to be contributing else. So make sure you keep the dialogue open with the volunteer, and make sure that you know what they want to do and how they will grow. And I will close with that. I think that it's a great responsibility of the NGOs, especially at this time and especially in Greece, to make sure that they provide volunteers transferable skills, skills that they can use in employment, because maybe they are students and in a few years they will graduate and they will have to find a job. Maybe they're not part of the workforce because they're unemployed. Things that they develop through their work in volunteering are things that they could potentially use later on. And that's very, very important. I think it's a great responsibility for NGOs to try and make sure that they do that, to try to provide them in a structured way and in a way that helps the people grow. I was reading on the Endeavor report that you guys financed that in Greece today there are 650,000 people who are unemployed and they're below 35 years old, of which 40%, so 250,000 people have never worked. They've never worked. They're below 35 years old, so maybe they're just off university, but maybe they're 30 years old. And that's 250,000 people that don't have any job experience. And I think that for those that do want to volunteer, and we talked about the spirit and the heart of the volunteerism, it's also important, and I think it's a responsibility for their NGOs to provide them with as much things back for the time and the energy that they give to you.
Thank you. Takis, anything to add perhaps on what provides for a positive volunteer experience, mistakes that perhaps you've seen, you volunteered yourself?
I do agree with panelists, but our thinking, we follow very strict protocol. You know, as Mr. Bastos told us, you know, we are going in Ghana, for instance, for only 2 weeks. We give surgery when they see patients that we prepare for the next team. We should be very, very careful with, we don't have to have complications or side effects. So our protocol is very strict. That first of all, we look for high skill, then high motivation, and then high passions. You know, I would like to have together a very good surgeon, high skill, only for 2 weeks. I don't want to have complication. The same for the islands. Now we are going to Psara, and we have booked for 6 surgeries with our dentist. We don't have to have complications. So first of all, for us, is high skill.
And you would agree with that?
Yes, but I think at least for us, in the effort to become more, not only more professional, also more accountable, we do more and more exercises of recording carefully what we do, tracing back the money, be transparent. This is in MSF, as a voluntary professional organization. Right now, and this is my personal opinion, we are beginning to sink a little bit too much on the side of professionalism, and I think that voluntary organizations, the leaders, have to make an important effort to remind constantly to the volunteers also the higher cause and the reason for existing of this organization and keep the motivation alive. Doesn't always happen. And when you make big efforts to be put in the standardization, the professionalization, if it goes for a long period of time with the same group, they may start forgetting and getting too lost in reaching the objectives. And it's very important to keep the motivation alive. It's the gasoline that nurtures the engine. The engine can be fantastic, but that's the fuel that you have to, for me, it will be the first one in the list, sorry. I would say first of all, be very careful to keep the motivation alive and then do all the other things.
Thank you. I was hoping να το θέσω, να το ανοίξουμε στο κοινό τους, αν είστε πολύ σύντομος.
Ένα λεπτό μόνο.
Πολύ σύντομο.
Just 1 minute, because we want to hand over to the audience. Well, my conclusion is to win over a volunteer, you need 3 things. To be able to have full transparency and innocuous nature of your actions. Secondly, for you to understand you are useful, the volunteer to understand that he has a role to play and he will be useful. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly, to really have the same common vision of the society, of that community within which he's working. So I think if you don't have that, then you will lose your volunteer.
Να πάρουμε ερωτήσεις από το κοινό.
So let's take questions from the audience.
Ο Στέλιος εδώ μπροστά.
Stelios here in the front.
Hello. Thank you. This is a great panel.
Έχεις δυνατή φωνή. Έχεις δυνατή φωνή.
Πηγαίνουμε προς πίσω.
Couple of quick questions. One is for Panagiotis and the other one is for Jose and Myrto. Let's start with you. We live at a time when people are becoming very, very busy. And as a result, what we see, at least in the US where I live, people used to volunteer, but now, which means that you basically offer your time and your effort. But now, because there is not enough time, people are beginning to feel very comfortable with just giving money. So that's happening more and more and more. I live in a community, a summer community, where people, professionals that live there, the summer community, they used to volunteer for everything that happened within the community. Building houses, repairing the common properties of the community, everything. Now, because everybody is so busy and the older generations are gone, everybody feels much more comfortable with just giving money, which they feel it's a form of volunteerism. So I wanted to ask the two of you whether or not you do consider that a form of volunteerism to begin with, and whether or not this is a trend that you think it will happen more and more and more. And now when it comes to Taikis, the mobile units is a great project in Greece, and it covers an amazing need, and it's a great volunteer effort. But at some point, when you have something like this that covers a great need, it needs to grow. And in order to grow and to be effective, there is a need to move from a volunteer model to something else, not for profit, but not volunteer any longer. So how comfortable do you feel with something like that? And is this something that is acceptable? in order to be as effective as you can be in society, something that starts as a volunteer effort, is it okay to turn into something else in order to be much more effective?
I can take the first question if you want. So your question was whether philanthropy and volunteering are the same thing. That's how I read it, at least. And for me personally, the charity, yes, that's a better word. For me, the answer is no. So in my mind, they're completely separate, and people shouldn't feel that because they're doing one thing, they shouldn't be doing the other, etc. Having said that, it's come out a lot in this discussion before that volunteering is not for everyone. It's for people that want to do it, that they have the heart to do it, that they can spend the time. And I think you always have the time. So for the things that you want, you find the time. Myrto is a young mother, and she's here. She finds the time to do her job and a lot of other volunteer activities that I know of. That's just an example. A lot of people here that I know have full-time jobs. They have their families. They volunteer in different causes, etc. So when you want to do something, you do it. You find the time to do it. So I think overall the answer is no, they're not the same thing. Volunteering is for those that want to do it, and it shouldn't be felt as an obligation. There are some people who are more comfortable with charity for whatever reason, maybe just their character or whatever it is that they want to do. And I think that's obviously very, very helpful, and it's how a lot of organizations survive. But they are different.
Well, yeah, you can add.
It's on the same, so just to continue. I fully agree with Myrto and disagree with you. I think we rarely find people that subcontract their voluntary work, which is more or less what you were suggesting. Instead of doing the voluntary work, they pay someone to do it. We don't talk about philanthropy, we talk about donors. And donors are individuals ranging from middle upper class to extremely elements of the very lower levels of the Spanish society who are squeezing their pockets, sometimes with €3 a month, assisting us, which at an individual level, they come from the very same point of departure as our volunteers, but they express it in a different way. I think it's the impulse to do something. Very often, I regularly meet our donors. It's a loyalty activity. We meet every 2 months with groups like this audience with our donors, and we have a face-to-face exchange, and I monitor regularly, follow up their phone calls. And there are really dramatic stories of persons in Spain and here in Greece who, despite the crisis, they keep understanding that solidarity is something necessary, and the little they can contribute to this financially, they do it. And that's really impressive and very, very respectful. So I think it's not one against the other at all. I think it's a different thing. It comes from the same impulse. It expresses itself in a different way. And keep in mind that for Medecins Sans Frontières all through the world, our main source, we really appreciate big foundations to assist us, that's no doubt. That's really good. But our main source of funding is individuals who contribute, many of them at the expense of a big effort individually. And this is very, very respectable. And I wouldn't think that they do it because they don't want to do volunteerism. It's their effort and their contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stelio. It is a great question. Actually, it's my real concern. I will let you know, Dr. Boazzi from New York, he started when he was 50 years old. For 10 years, he was taking a surgical team. He was traveling to Ghana. He comes from Ghana. Now he's 60. He retires from New York, and he's going to Ghana. Why he had the same concern? What's going on? The next step. The Stavros Niarchos Foundation actually he helped, and he built a hospital there. And now he's going to Ghana. And he opens the hospital for teaching education in Western Africa and in Europe for new surgeons, and he will set down. For our medical units, the next step is to state, okay, we try to have a financial study at the end of the first year to know exactly the cost for every trip. But we try to keep the high-skilled doctors, because the high-skilled doctors actually don't like to stay permanently for this type of career. The state should give, should have a plan for this type of doctors to help these people. It's a real concern that I don't know. It's the first year. I will know next year the results of the financial study. I can say more.
Thank you.
Moving to another question. Over there. We'll start with the lady at the back. Yes.
Thank you for all of this information. from the Therapeutic Riding Centre of Ceres. I'm a physiotherapist and I'm a volunteer in the centre. And it is a grantee of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation with respect to the stabling, the stables. We operate on the basis of volunteers only. We only have a stable hand for about 12 people. It's a very specialised job because this cannot be done by everybody. We have a lot of volunteers for other auxiliary jobs and tasks. However, there are also people, children that are jewels, if you like. They are graduates. They come on a volunteer basis to help, and they'll come for a year, 2 years. They're unemployed. And it really touches me because we see them, we need them, and we need to invest upon them. We cannot actually pay a fee. We cannot give them a salary. We train them. We take them to seminars as much as we can do. But we cannot keep them on, unfortunately, in our therapeutic riding centre. And tell me, what can we do so I can help them along their way? I work at the Ministry of Education, and we have 2 or 3 people helping us along, but we don't know what to do for them to help them. Okay, we know that even though volunteerism is a good thing, it is a good thing on the CV. So what can we do for the volunteers? That's the question. It's a concern of mine.
Myrto, you want to?
You already answered with the...
I will start with... Συγγνώμη, θα μιλήσω στα ελληνικά γιατί δεν είναι στα ελληνικά ερώτηση.
I'll reply to the question in Greek. Now, on a personal note, unfortunately, as to whether you can offer these people a job or not, I mean, all of these bodies, whether NGOs or companies or whatever, do have limited means. So I do think that what you should do is to give these young people some sort of basis so that they can add to their CVs through the work they've been doing. If you want to be of practical use to these people, I mean, they, of course, like to be with you and to offer their services, but perhaps enable them to develop certain skills of volunteerism, which has nothing to do with paid work. The socialization aspects, structure of time. Now, these are skills that people need when they move into the labor market. So socialization is important, as well as networking, because that is important. If you start discussing with people, opportunities also offer themselves, perhaps even for a job, when you start involving yourself. So I think that one can help these unemployed people in this sense. Acquisition of skills, acquisition of self-confidence, which is important on the labour market as well.
Please state your name, I mean, as you've done so far, but just a reminder, state your name, organization, and limit yourself to questions.
Greek or English?
Anything you prefer.
Γεια σας.
Good morning. I represent the NGO Thesmos, and thank you, Myrto, for the reference to volunteerism. And we work with the Lambraki Foundation. I do hope that one can actually achieve the results that we all envisage. So I'd like to make mention of something which we have been thinking about, because this, as an institution, is growing geometrically. Volunteers are a substantial part of our work, therefore. So what I have noted is that in trying to use our volunteers properly, we want to try and adapt ourselves to the skills set that they have, in the sense that we can't say no to a volunteer who wants to offer time and skills. And we must therefore do whatever we can to keep that person's interest alive. and in large, more specialized formats, such as medical help, where the skills are more specific and purposeful, that's easier. But in an NGO, how are you to achieve that? And secondly, is it moral to say no to volunteers? Is it ethical? And when you deal with volunteers who want to offer their time in a fashion which is linked into describing the tasks, supervision, job enlargement, task enlargement, rewards, and to work on the basic of a logic of how one would deal with a worker in our organization, how do we actually figure in taxation, time allotted from us, for example? So, as concerns your first question, for students from the medical faculty, what I tell them is that there should be a very high incentive for them to acquire more skills. If they come to Ghana with me, they'll see operations they've never seen before. So they will acquire experience and keeping their motivation high. It's difficult to do that in the long term. But what we try to do is to give them other empirical knowledge, but also incentive for other tasks, publishing, say, a particular study of theirs. But in the long term, they will tire unless you have that motivation element built in. Also, we have actually said no to a lot of people. Dr. Boaz in New York, of course, has rejected quite a few people because the base is the same. I mean, everyone is highly motivated and ethical. But if you see that they don't fit into the team and may dissolve the team, you do not allow them to enter the team. I mean, it's not a playground. It's not a playground. I think that you need to just keep in mind professionalism here. It's not all cool and volunteerism. It's rather more serious on a professional level.
Please name organization, and if you can limit yourselves to one question, because otherwise you won't give the opportunity to the rest.
My name is Ellen. I'm a teacher, counselor, community service coordinator at ACS Athens. We've done years of volunteer work in the community. But the only reason we've been able to is because we are not a Greek school. We've done lots of projects, and I want to thank people like Mr. Benos and all the NGOs that have opened our doors and allowed our students to learn how to be good citizens. My biggest disappointment has been not being able to initiate even greater projects in the community because of the bureaucracy. And the only reason half the projects we've done is because of people like Mr. Benos that were able to bend the rules a little for us to exist. As students trying to make change. So my question is, how can the NGOs further, or other organizations and people, help to break down the walls that keep our students from having access to the community that that everyone benefits from changing?
I will answer very shortly, and then I'll pass to Mr. Benos, because I'm sure he will have something to say. But I will give you just a very brief perspective, and I think because you mentioned the schools and the students, etc. Actually, last year we did an event with a private school as well regarding volunteerism, and Myrto was also part of it as part of Stray. An NGO and a number of NGOs from different principles. So let's say environment, animals, society, etc. And we were also able to do that because it was a private school. Now I will go back to ECABI, who was the previous question. They've taken it a step further, and they are introducing it in a systematic way, starting with a pilot program and also public schools. So I think, just to answer briefly, the answer is, if you want to do something that's lasting and makes a lasting change, you have to do it through the institutions. Because you can do one-offs, and they're great, and they make a difference. If you want to do it properly, you have to do it through the institutions. So I think the effort that's being done today with volunteering in schools hopefully will lead to something that's sustainable and has to do with everyone in Greece. So.
Beno.
I think the secret is for there to be a synergy with state bodies. And I'm saying this because quite often NGOs on this particular issue may seem to have a negative stance. In Greece, after the dictatorship in the last 40 years, we see the phenomenon of the pendulum, and a lot of NGOs have swung to the other side of the pendulum. In other words, they're either asking money from the state to survive, or they go to the other extreme of activism. Now, I think that the best way to have an NGO is to be in complete synergy with the state, and that opens up the way. It opens up the path. I mean, with Diazoma, our organization, we're doing things that would have been inconceivable in the past. For example, our organization with private funding has engendered studies which are difficult on monuments, not for playgrounds or for a nursery. This was something that the Ministry of Culture would have actually accepted, a ready-made study. But when we spoke to them, they didn't have any arguments to counter this offer we were making. Two monuments, for example, at Delphi and Delphos theatres, belong to the archaeological school, and they couldn't actually interact with the state bodies. So we then had an interaction with the French archaeological foundation, or the school specifically, and whereas the ministry would have needed 500,000 euros in 5 years, we were able to do it in 1/5 the time and 1/5 the money. So we open up, in other words, the road and link in the state with these organizations. Now, the difficulties were such that until we were functioning, if you, for example, or any citizen in the world wanted to say, I want to offer 100 euros for a Byzantine church, there was no way you could have donated that money, no way for the state to accept that money. So the secret here is that we act as the intervener, the intermediary, and create a synergy between the organizations and the state, which has a multiplicatory effect in the qualitative and quantitative sense.
And the final question, and that will be the end of the session. We can speak. You can speak to the people individually because we only have a set time allocated. I could cede my place to the lady if it's so important. I will cede my place. No. I think we cannot actually hear him. I'm Father Synodinus from the Bishopry of Athens. It's not so much a question. I wanted to make a statement, if you so permit. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Benos for his reference to the church because, as you know, it is, in fact, the #1 body for volunteerism. It's, of course, natural because volunteerism is, in fact, the very nature of the church, its teachings and its message. So I think that it would be a bad thing if we didn't have mostly volunteer amongst us. From these volunteers that are more than 120,000 who have been officially registered, and more than 200,000 if we look at those who have not registered, we know that they're not all specialized or skilled. And it's very important for us, the clergy, when we come to these conferences, to listen to these ideas because they're very important. There's a lot of know-how behind them, and we can convey this to our church. I would like to say that over recent times, there is, in fact, a continued training of our young clergy with respect to these sections and these matters. It has not been heard, neither in the morning sessions nor at any point in the conference. I don't want to be misunderstood by this. We haven't heard about a difference with respect to volunteerism and the ethics of charity and philanthropy that we heard, because the church actually does this out of love and out of its respect to people's human face. That's the most important. Now, on that basis, I'd like to say something with respect to the doctors who visit the islands. I will be brief, yes, but I think it's worth saying, because I think we should say something about those people who do the job. I went to Niarchos and I've looked at them. I saw them actually carry out the program, and I saw a combination of everything we have said there. We see the grant from the foundation. Love to our brethren. It was demonstrated by the high professionalism of all doctors and the collaboration with the local community, but it was with great respect to people's human face. And I'd like to say one thing, and you'll understand what I'm getting at. I was asking the people of the island how they were doing with the doctors. They said they were fantastic people. They smiled at us. We felt their warmth. And there was a lady who was quite old. We're not going to say that she was old, because women are always girls from 8 to 80. And she said to me, "Priest, Father, you know, these doctors that came this time did not come to hand out their cards in order to have people come to the medical practice. So congratulations to the foundation. I'd like to thank Panagiotis and the entire team of people who have worked long and hard there. Thank you very much."
Thank you all.